It's time to spice up the way you play multiplayer in Flesh and Blood. For this video, I'm going to talk about 5 ways that you can try to approach multiplayer for Flesh and Blood, and they're not even exclusionary. You can mix and match those, but before I get into the thick of it, I need to talk a bit about why I'm making this video in the first place, and that means a rant. I'm sorry, community, but I've heard lots of complaints about Flesh and Blood, and I've heard everything from it's meant to be a one-on-one game, it's meant to be a competitive game, it's not casual friendly, especially because of the low variance involved compared to other games, and that multiplayer feels like an afterthought. And to be honest, I don't even necessarily disagree with any of that, but that all sounds like complaints, and I'm tired of being part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution, and I think part of the reason I've been a bit of the problem is because I've been playing digital card games for so long now that I've kind of subconsciously adapted to it. And what I mean by that is that when you play a digital card game, whether it's Hearthstone, Legends of Runeterra, what have you, you can only play the game the way the client lets you play the game. You cannot really innovate. And I missed that from physical trading card games, but I also kind of forgot that I could do it over the years. And I was thinking the other day about all the fun ways I used to enjoy Magic, especially in the 90s when it was kind of the Wild West, right? So in the 90s, yes, we had competitive play, we had arena leagues and Friday Night Magic, and I've got a plaque on my wall from like the 1997 MTG Arena League. So it's not like competitive play and organized play wasn't there, but it wasn't the end all be all point, right? Back then, it felt like anyway, in my local area, the local game stores were trying to just bring people in to have a good time and to explore wacky ways to get people into the door. And sometimes it was one-on-one formats. We would play Mental Magic and Mini Masters and Pack Wars and all sorts of fun stuff. But we also had multiplayer events and multiplayer tournaments, and so that's where some of the classics popped up. We had things like Bounty and Emperor and Two-Headed Giant and Commander, though back then it was Elder Dragon Highlander, and so I just remembered that, hey, we can do whatever we want with Flesh and Blood. We don't have to play it the way LSS has dictated we play it, and I think part of that is how we are going to make things more casual friendly and how we're going to get people who want these kind of more relaxed game modes to engage in Flesh and Blood. And so with that in mind, I've got some ideas. I do just want to say a couple of things before we finally jump into the meat here. One, all of these examples are really intended for playing with young heroes in the Blitz mode, just because I think that's more accessible. Also with multiplayer, you kind of want to keep the games shorter. That being said, again, I'm not your dad. You can play the game however you want, and you can absolutely adapt any of these to be played as classic constructed with adult heroes. Also, these are meant to be inspirational, so if you don't exactly like the way I do a game mode, then change it. Again, I'm not your dad, so do whatever you want. And if you don't even see something in this video from the 5 choices that really tickles your fancy, then that's fine. Tickle your own fancy. Come up with something else. That's my entire point. We do not have to be shackled by the rules that are presented to us. We can do whatever we want. Now, again, I have really high hopes for this player versus environment mode when that eventually comes out. But until then, I'm hoping you'll give these a try either in your own friends group, play group, kitchen table style, or maybe you want to bring one of these events to the local game store and give it a go. I'll even kind of try to give you ways that you can score these, because let's be honest, like, they're not exactly official formats, but if you still wanted to hand out prizes or whatever, there are plenty of ways to do it, because again, most of these are going to be old Magic formats that my local stores did, and then I'm just kind of repurposing them within the rules of Flesh and Blood. So now that that intro is finally out of the way, let's dive into the first example. I find that it's easiest to get people to try something new when there's a level of familiarity, so this first one is going to be very low-hanging fruit. And it's just Highlander. Now, if you're not familiar, Highlander is when you can only have 1 copy of each card in your deck. It is the backbone of Commander because, again, that started as Elder Dragon Highlander. If you're young or, I don't know, just not somebody who's very cultured, I guess, and yes, that's a direct slap at people who don't enjoy this movie, but Highlander as a format comes from the movie series Highlander. There was also a TV series, and the catchphrase for that was, "There can be only one." So with that in mind, you just build a deck with only 1 copy of each card, and then you play it. Now, Flesh and Blood has a bit of an interesting dilemma because technically, with the way that you deck build in Flesh and Blood, you could theoretically consider a red pummel, a yellow pummel, and a blue pummel to be 3 separate cards because we do consider that during deck building. But if the whole point to these casual formats is to increase variance and decrease overall power level, and as well as, in my opinion, I think it's more fun if we also go deeper into our card pool, maybe give cards a try that we wouldn't normally give a try. Maybe we look for new kind of 2-card combos and synergies and things like that. I'm a big fan of playing Highlander strictly by the book, meaning 1 card by the name each. So if you're going to play a pummel, you got to pick which color you want to go with, and then you get the true Highlander experience, because after all,
there can be only one.
And then essentially you just play by Ultimate Pit Fighter rules. You get everybody around a table, you play with your Highlander deck, and it's going to be the closest thing to the Commander experience because we're already a hero-centric game. And so once you add in the Highlander limitations, you're going to be pretty close to Commander. And so I think this is a good starting point for people looking for a casual game mode, but don't worry, I got more ideas. So the next idea is what I was originally going to call Fabulous Highlander because I love puns, and obviously Flesh and Blood is shortened to Fab as the preferred acronym very often. But I think that more commonly folks will likely end up referring to this as either Rainbow Highlander, or maybe if they want to be extra specific, Gorganian Highlander, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But this is just Highlander. However, you've got some additional rules on top of it to, again, kind of increase that variance and decrease the power level. But also you're playing into one of the things that I think is unique about Flesh and Blood, and that is the different colors for pitch. So with this format, because it's the Rainbow Highlander, you still are only allowed 1 card by name, but you also are required to have exactly 13 reds, 13 yellows, 13 blues, and 1 Gorganian tome, because that doesn't technically have a color. But also, this is a multiplayer format, and that's a card that I think just gets more fun and more wacky the more players you have at the table playing the card. And so why not? Why not just dive right into a format where you can take advantage of this? Now, again, the reasons I like this are increases variance, decreases power level. It's again just going to be played like Ultimate Pit Fighter, but with both Ultimate Pit Fighter in traditional Highlander and with this Rainbow Highlander. Again, if you're running this at the local game store, there's a number of ways that you can score this or give out door prizes or whatever. So you can give out prizes to obviously whoever's left, you know, the winner, the last person standing. You can also give out prizes based on eliminations if you want. If you want to run more than 1 round, then you can also give prizes based on finish and then eliminations, et cetera, et cetera. Again, it's not an actual scored format. You're not going to be able to put this stuff into gems. So you kind of be creative. You can also just do raffles at the end of the night, but I think giving people something to play for still makes it a little bit of fun. And there's a lot of leeway here. So you can score it however you want. More emphasis on being the last one standing, more emphasis on eliminations if you want to encourage folks getting in and mixing it up, whatever the case may be. So with that in mind, those are for deck building, right? So those first 2 ideas are just ways that you can say, hey, here's how we make the game a little more casual friendly. But the next 3 ideas I want to cover are ways to shake up the multiplayer format, because I, again, think you can combine any number of these and then still have a really fun game mode. So let's dive into the first of the formats, which is Bounty. With Bounty, you start by having all of the players write their name on a card. Now, when we played this in Magic, you used to just write your name on a basic land. I think with Flesh and Blood, you could pick any token or a cracked bauble, but you write your name on it, you shuffle up the cards, and then you deal them to everybody at the table face down. The card that you receive, whoever's name is on it, that is your bounty. You can only attack whoever your bounty is. When you defeat that player, you claim their card becomes your new bounty, and you rinse and repeat until there's only 1 person alive left at the table. Now, if you ever have your own name, you can attack anybody, but the moment you defeat somebody, you claim their card, and now that's your new bounty. So again, lots of ways that you can score this. You can put an emphasis on whoever's the last player standing. You can reward people who claim the most bounties, etc., etc. If you play multiple rounds, again, you could assign points. give out door prizes as such. But this is kind of fun because it's kind of a bit of a guessing game at times, because you will have somebody attack you, and so they might have you as the bounty, and you're like, okay, I know what I'm defending against, but they also could just have their own name, and you don't really know unless you see them deviate at the last second. So there's a bit of a mystery to it. There's also this, I think, really unique tension that Flesh and Blood brings, where you're attacking a player but defending against somebody else. So normally in Flesh and Blood, there's this kind of give and take, this ebb and flow, because as you attack and they defend, you're depleting their cards. But now you're doing this around the table, right? It's not as cut and dry as, okay, if I go on offense, they might have to defend a bunch. Now you're kind of hoping that whoever is attacking you, the person that has them as a bounty, goes on offense and forces them to have to defend. So you're kind of at the whims of other people defensively, while also trying to race down whoever your bounty is, so that you can move further down the chain. And I don't know, I just think it would be really neat. Again, this is the format. The previous ideas were deck building, and so naturally you can mix and match. If you want to do Highlander bounty, have at it. You want to do Rainbow Highlander bounty? I love it. Sign me up. This is the first of the formats, but I've got a couple more I want to talk about, and these next two are team-based formats. So if you are somebody who maybe loves Two-Headed Giant, maybe one of these formats will scratch that itch for you. And speaking of Two-Headed Giant, this next one is perhaps my favorite of the video. It's not quite Two-Headed Giant because I didn't feel like that would fit Flesh and Blood very well. After all, we're a very hero-centric, character-centric game, and Two-Headed Giant just felt like an amalgamation of two different players. Also, I just didn't feel like the way the turns are oriented in that format would fit Flesh and Blood very well. And if I'm being honest, I loved the idea of this kind of hot swapping team strategy, which will make sense here in a moment. And that's why I consider this format tag team. It is meant for teams of two playing against each other, and you present your heroes, figure out who's going first, etc. And then each team decides who the active battler is. So you've got an active battler and then somebody on the bench. And then both teams also get a card that is Tag Me In. And I'm going to put an example up on the screen here because I think that it really sells what we're going for here. So Tag Me In says you are the active battler, so you give this to whoever your active battler is. It also says at the start of your turn, if Tag Me In has less than 2 rest counters on it, put a rest counter on it. Your teammate gains 1 health. So the idea is if they are not active, they are resting, so they gain 1 health a turn. And then if you are the active player, then your Tag Me In gets a rest counter. And this doesn't have a May. I don't want people missing this like with Tunic counters. So I just felt like, again, this is meant to be a fun format. I didn't want any sort of gotchas. Tag Me In also has an instant of you pay 3 pitch, so pitch a blue or whatever. I wanted there to still be some kind of cost to it, but as an instant, you can remove 2 rest counters from Tag Me In, and then your teammate gains control of Tag Me In. So they become the active battler because that's the first line of text on Tag Me In. The idea here being that just like in a tag team wrestling match, you can tag your opponent in, they start fighting, and there's a lot of strategy involved with when to tag. Now, this is also why I went with the rest counters, because I didn't want this to be an every turn thing, right? I wanted there to be some sort of selective decision making on when the right time to tag in is. I think that helps build that cool tension in a game. But the idea here is if you're on offense, you're attacking, right? Maybe you spend 3 cards to attack, and then instead of arsenaling that last card, you pitch a blue, tag your teammate in with their full hand, and then they keep going on offense, right? Similarly, because this is an instant, if your opponent is pummeling you, you could block with 3 cards and then tag in your opponent to continue blocking. And so figuring out as a team when to do this, I think is important. Again, the passive player gaining health, I think, is a really neat concept because you are encouraged to swap back and forth a bit as well, because I don't think you want one player just sitting on the sidelines the entire game. And just overall, I really enjoy this. Now, in my mind for this format, you win when you have eliminated both of the other players. If an active battler falls, then the teammate just becomes the de facto player. And the reason for that is because if you ever ran this as an event, that helps you with tiebreakers. So you eliminate both players and you don't lose any, that's a 2-0 victory. If you win the match, but you lose one of your team members along the way, that's a 2-1 victory. Again, Flesh and Blood is meant to be best of one, but this helps you with those tiebreakers because, again, there's no gem. You can't manually enter things into a computer and have it spit stuff out for you. You're probably going to have to do some stuff by hand, but I think that it's worth it for a cool format like this. I also just really like the idea of building a team for this, because you can go with a highly disruptive team, a very defensive team, maybe like Oldham and Bravo. You could have one team that is half physical, and then your teammate is Kano, so that your opponents don't know how they want to equip, because again, you'll present heroes, figure out your stuff, and then sort it all out, right? So I just think, again, there's a lot of really fun mind games involved with this format. I'm a big fan, and I hope that some of you will give it a try. I'd love to get feedback on it, because I just really think that this is a neat way to approach a 2-person team Flesh and Blood style event. And so with that in mind, the last format that I want to talk about is a 3-person team event, and it is just going to be straight up a ripoff of an old Magic format, but I think that it's very fitting, and that format is Emperor. Now, Emperor doesn't get its name from the new Emperor card in Flesh and Blood, but it is actually kind of what got me thinking about the format in general, because I was like, oh yeah, there's an Emperor card. Man, I used to love playing Emperor in Magic. So if you're not familiar, this is kind of like the trading card game version of Protect the President, or any other game that you have played similarly. A lot of times you'll actually play them with like dodgeball, or you'll do it with like paintball or whatever, but this is the trading card equivalent. So you win when you eliminate the opposing emperor. It is teams of 3. You sit directly across from each other. Position matters, and I'm going to throw up an example here. The center player of each team is the emperor, and the way that it works is your flankers can only attack in one space or in one direction, because obviously to their right is their emperor, or to their left is their emperor, depending on which side they're on. So they can only attack the other flanker in front of them, but that's with attacks. Now in Magic, it used to be that spells and area effects would go 2 spaces, meaning a flanker could cast spells at an emperor. So the equivalent in Flesh and Blood would be something like a Kano being able to use non-attack actions to target an emperor. So you can throw that lesson in lava at an opposing emperor if you're a Kano as a flanker. Similarly, the opposing flankers can target your emperor that way. Now, the one other bit here is that in Magic, it used to be that the emperor could also donate creatures or donate artifacts or other permanents to the left or the right during their turn. And so for the Flesh and Blood version, it's going to be that you can donate items, auras, allies to the left or the right during the arsenal phase. Now, I really like this during the arsenal because it gives you the opportunity to play an item and then immediately donate it when you would be arsenaling, just because that will perhaps give you a reason to play Genus as an emperor, for example. While he's got 2 flankers protecting him, he can also donate them some items and feel like he's useful for a change. And I think that that is, again, just a really neat way to kind of promote how things are working. This is also a format where Yoji could potentially shine, and all sorts of other neat things could come up. So in this example, I don't have a Dromai on the board, but theoretically, if you had a Dromai as an emperor, even though the flankers might not be able to attack with the dragons, you could still donate a Thamai, and then because the aura effects go 2 spaces, it would shut down the emperor and the flanker from being able to do things on that flanker's turn. So again, a lot of strategy involved. As far as scoring goes, kind of the same thing. You win the round when you take out the emperor, but you can give bonus points for tiebreakers depending on the number of players that you have eliminated. So you could get as many as 3 points for a win if you eliminate both flankers and the emperor. And then you give out door prizes at the end of the night based on total finishes, etc., etc. And that's it for this video. Again, 5 ways for you to change up or spice up your Flesh and Blood multiplayer experience. We're all familiar with Ultimate Pit Fighter, but if I'm being honest, at least for me locally, there's not a lot of people that are even trying Ultimate Pit Fighter out, let alone some casual, friendly, wacky new formats. And I think that as bad for the game, if I'm being honest. I think that we need to embrace the wacky, embrace the casual, come up with some formats that we can play at our kitchen table, that we can get our friends to try, and maybe even just pre-build some decks. Again, I love doing this with young heroes, and so maybe you just make a series of decks that are meant for like commoner even, but even more so, do the Rainbow Highlander thing and then get your friends to play Bounty or to play Tag Team or even Emperor if you got a big group, and then do it at your kitchen table, do it at your local game store, get them to buy into it as well. Doesn't even have to be on an armory night. It could be in an off night, or maybe you can just try to convince people to stick around when the armory is done and do one multiplayer game, just so that you can get folks to embrace the wacky, embrace the casual, and get people to buy into this idea that Flesh and Blood can be more than just a 1 versus 1 competitive card game. And again, I want to just emphasize, if you don't like any of these, that's fine. Then try your own. There is nothing stopping you. And I hope that you do. I hope you try some of mine. I hope you try some of your own. And I'd love to get your feedback. So if you made it this far, I love you. I appreciate you. This community is awesome. Thank you for watching. And I hope to see you at an event. And I even more so hope to see you playing some multiplayer along the way.